Jake Morrison was drinking his morning coffee when the proximity alarm started screaming across New Dallas Station. The mining platform orbited a dead rock in the Kepler system, far from Earth, but close enough to the outer colonies that they got regular supply runs. Jake had been station commander for 3 years, and had never seen anything more exciting than a malfunctioning ore processor. Lisa Grant burst into his office without knocking. Her face was pale, and she was holding a scanner that kept beeping. In short bursts, Jake knew that look. Lisa had been his deputy for 2 years, and she only looked that worried when something was seriously wrong. "Commander, we have 12 ships on approach vector," she said. "They're big, really big, and they're not responding to our hails." Jake set down his coffee cup and followed Lisa to the command center. The main screen showed a tactical display. That made his stomach drop. 12 massive ships were moving toward them in perfect formation. Each ship was at least twice the size of anything in the Terran Defense Force. They looked like someone had taken a cathedral and covered it in weapons. "How long until they reach us?" Jake asked. 20 minutes at current speed," said Ben Carter, from his position at the engineering station. Ben was the kind of engineer who could fix anything with spare parts and determination. He was also the only person on the station who stayed calm in emergencies. "But Commander, you need to see this." Ben transferred his readings to the main screen. The energy signatures coming from those ships were unlike anything in human databases. The propulsion systems alone were generating more power than New Dallas. "Used in a month. First contact," whispered Dr. Kelly Brooks from behind them. Kelly was the station doctor, but she had studied xenobiology before coming out to the frontier. "We're looking at alien ships." Jake felt his heart racing, but forced himself to think clearly. New Dallas had a crew of 47 people. They had mining equipment, some basic defensive systems, and a communication array that could reach Earth in 6 hours. They were not equipped for first contact with an alien civilization. "Send a message to Earth," Jake ordered. "Tell them what we're seeing." "Ben, can you boost the signal?" "Already on it," Ben replied. His fingers were flying over his console. "I'm routing power from the mining lasers to the communication array. We'll get through to Earth even if those ships try to jam us." The alien ships were getting closer. Jake could see details now. The hulls were smooth and dark, like they were made from a single piece of metal. Strange symbols glowed along their sides in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The lead ship was easily a kilometer long. "Incoming transmission," Lisa announced. "It's coming from the lead ship." "Put it on screen," Jake said. The main display flickered and showed the inside of what looked like the alien ship's bridge. The being standing in the center was tall and thin, with gray skin and forearms. Its eyes were large and completely black. When it spoke, the words came through the universal translator in a voice like grinding metal. "Primitive creatures of this system," the alien said. "I am Admiral Kethfor of the Zephyrian Empire. You will surrender immediately or be destroyed. You have one of your time units to comply." Jake looked around the command center. His crew was staring at him, waiting for orders. He thought about all the training he had received, all the protocols for dealing with hostile contacts. None of them had prepared him for this moment. "Open a channel," Jake said quietly. Lisa nodded and activated the communication system. Jake straightened his uniform and looked directly at the alien admiral on the screen. "Admiral Kethfor, I'm Commander Jake Morrison of New Dallas Mining Station," he said in his calmest voice. "We're peaceful miners working in unclaimed space. We'd like to discuss trade agreements and diplomatic relations." The alien's expression didn't change, but Jake heard what sounded like laughter from other beings off-screen. Admiral Kethfor moved closer to his own camera. "You mistake us for merchants." "Human," Kethfor said. The Zephyrian Empire does not trade with inferior species. You exist to serve us now. Surrender or die. Jake felt anger building in his chest, but kept his voice level. Admiral, we're not looking for trouble, but we're also not going to surrender to anyone without cause. If you want to discuss terms, we can do that. If you want to start a war, that's your choice. Admiral Kethver made a gesture with one of his forearms. Your defiance is noted and irrelevant. The communication channel closed, and the alien ships opened fire. Not on New Dallas Station itself, but on the communication array. The array exploded in a shower of sparks and debris. Jake felt the station shudder as secondary explosions rippled through the outer hull sections. Communication array is gone, Ben reported. But I got the message to Earth before they hit us. Help is coming. How long? Jake asked. 6 hours minimum. For the message to reach Earth. Add time for them to scramble a response fleet. We're looking at maybe 12 hours if we're lucky. Jake nodded. 12 hours to keep his crew alive against an alien empire that had weapons he couldn't even understand. He looked around at his people. Lisa was already working on damage control. Ben was rerouting power around the destroyed sections. Kelly was preparing the medical bay for casualties. They were scared, but they weren't broken. All hands, this is it. Commander Morrison, Jake announced over the station intercom. We have hostile aliens demanding our surrender. We've sent word to Earth, and help is coming. Until then, we follow standard emergency protocols. Stay calm, stay together, and remember your training. The alien ships moved closer, and Jake could see smaller craft launching from their bays. Boarding ships. Admiral Kethvar wasn't planning to destroy New Dallas Station. He wanted to capture it, and everyone on it. Jake thought about his options. They had mining charges that could be rigged as explosives. They had environmental suits that would let them move through damaged sections. They had 47 people who had chosen to live on the edge of known space because they weren't the kind to give up easily. Lisa, get everyone into pressure suits, Jake ordered. Ben, can you rig some of those mining charges? Already thought of that, Ben replied with a grim smile. But Commander, these aliens have been doing this for a while. They'll be ready for booby traps and desperate resistance. Jake watched the boarding craft getting closer and made a decision that would change everything. Then we don't resist the way they expect. We do something they've never seen before. The first alien boarding craft attached to New Dallas Station, with a metallic clang that echoed through the corridors. Jake Morrison and his crew were about to teach the Zephyrian Empire their first lesson about humans. You don't fight them and win. Quickly, you fight them and discover that winning and surviving are two very different things. Admiral Patricia Wells was reviewing supply reports when the emergency signal from New Dallas Station reached Earth. The quantum burst transmission came through the deep space, monitoring station at Luna Base with a priority code she had never seen used in actual combat. Patricia had commanded the Terran Defense Force for 8 years, and she knew that. Jake Morrison was not the type to send false alarms. The message was short and terrifying. Alien ships had attacked New Dallas Station and captured the crew. The beings called themselves the Zephyrian Empire, and they had technology that made human weapons look like stone axes. Patricia immediately called President Chris Matthews and General Sam Rodriguez to an emergency meeting. How many ships do we have in that sector? President Matthews asked. He was a calm man who had led Earth through 3 economic crises, but Patricia could see the worry in his eyes. None that could reach New Dallas in time, Patricia replied. The closest battle group is 18 hours away. By the time we get there, those aliens will either be gone or have killed everyone on the station. General Rodriguez was studying the tactical data that Ben Carter had managed to transmit before the communication array was destroyed. Sam had spent 30 years in the military, and Patricia had never seen him look so concerned. "These ships are massive," Sam said quietly. "Look at these energy readings. One of their vessels could probably destroy our entire lunar defense grid. If they're hostile and they have more ships, we're in serious trouble." President Matthews stood up and walked to the window overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Patricia knew. He was thinking about the 3 billion people on Earth and the 40 million humans living in the outer colonies. They were facing an enemy that could destroy everything humanity had built. "What are our options?" the president asked. Patricia pulled up a holographic display showing human space. Red dots marked every colony, mining station, and outpost from Earth to the frontier. There were over 200 locations where humans lived and worked. "We can't fight them ship to ship," Patricia said honestly. "Their technology is too advanced. We could evacuate the outer colonies, but that would take months, and they'd probably stop us. Or we could try to negotiate with people who attack first and demand surrender," General Rodriguez said. "That doesn't sound promising." President Matthews turned back to face them. "There's a third option, something we've never tried before." Patricia and Sam exchanged glances. The president had that look he got when he was about to suggest something that sounded crazy but might actually work. "Protocol 7, the president said quietly. Patricia felt her stomach drop. Protocol 7 was a theoretical plan that had been developed during the colony wars but never implemented. It was based on a simple idea that most military planners thought was insane. Instead of fighting an enemy you couldn't defeat, you made yourself impossible to govern. "Sir, Protocol 7 has never been tested," Patricia said. "We don't know if it would work against an alien empire." "We know conventional warfare won't work," President Matthews replied. "These aliens expect us to either surrender or fight them in space battles we can't win. Protocol 7 gives us a third choice." "General," Rodriguez was nodding slowly, "make every human settlement ungovernable. Don't fight the occupation. Just make it cost more than it's worth." "Exactly," the president said. "Admiral Wells, I want you to send the Protocol 7 activation codes to every human colony and outpost. Tell them they are not to engage in direct combat with alien forces. Instead, they are to become the most difficult people in the galaxy to control." Patricia hesitated. Protocol 7 meant abandoning millions of humans to alien occupation with nothing but their wits and stubbornness to protect them. It was either brilliant or suicidal. "What about New Dallas Station?" she asked. "Jake Morrison and his crew are already prisoners. They're about to become our first teachers," President Matthews said grimly. On New Dallas Station, Jake Morrison was learning what Zephyrian imprisonment looked like. The aliens had herded all 47 humans into the station's cargo bay and surrounded them with guards carrying weapons that hummed with deadly energy. Admiral Kethver stood before them with what Jake assumed was a satisfied expression. "You are now property of the Zephyrian Empire," Kethver announced. "You will work to repair the damage your resistance caused. You will obey all orders without question. Failure to comply will result in painful death." Jake looked around at his crew. Lisa Grant was helping an injured technician. Ben Carter was studying the alien guards with the same careful attention he gave to broken machinery. Dr. Kelly Brooks was treating cuts and burns while watching their captors with professional interest. "What do you want us to do?" Jake asked. "Admiral Kethver, restore this station to full operation," Kethver replied. "Your primitive mining equipment will serve our purposes until we establish proper facilities." Jake nodded as if he understood. "We'll need access to the engineering sections and the ore processing equipment. You will work under constant supervision," Kethver said. Any attempt at sabotage will be met with immediate execution. Jake looked at Ben Carter and saw understanding in the engineer's eyes. They weren't going to sabotage anything in ways the aliens expected. They were going to do exactly what they were told, but they were going to do it the human way. Meanwhile, across human space, Admiral Wells' message was reaching every colony and outpost. The Protocol 7 activation codes triggered emergency meetings on dozens of worlds. On Haven Colony, Governor Amy Thompson gathered her department heads and explained what they were facing. We're about to be invaded by aliens who think they can govern us the same way they've governed other species, Amy told her staff. Our job is to prove them wrong without getting ourselves killed. Pete Johnson, the colony's chief engineer, raised his hand. Governor, what exactly does that mean? Amy smiled grimly. It means we're going to follow every order they give us, exactly as they give it to us. And we're going to discover that humans are very literal people who need very detailed instructions to do anything properly. Back on New Dallas Station, the first lesson was beginning. Admiral Kethvar had ordered the humans to restart the ore processing equipment. Jake Morrison led Ben Carter and 3 technicians to the processing bay, while alien guards followed. Them, turn on the ore processor, the lead guard commanded. Ben Carter walked to the control panel and activated the main power switch. The machine hummed to life for exactly 30 seconds before shutting down with a grinding noise. The machine is broken, the guard said suspiciously. No, it's working perfectly, Ben replied honestly. You told me to turn it on. You didn't tell me to load ore into it first. Running an ore processor without ore damages the internal mechanisms, so the safety systems shut it down automatically. The guard looked confused. In the Zephyrian Empire, orders were followed efficiently without question. The idea that a command could be technically obeyed while producing useless results was completely foreign. Jake Morrison watched the exchange and knew that Protocol 7 was going to work better than anyone had imagined. The Zephyrian Empire was about to learn that conquering humans and controlling them were 2 very different problems. Commander Veltar of the Zephyrian Occupation Force stood in the center of New Austin Colony and wondered how everything had gone so wrong. 6 months ago, his fleet had arrived expecting the usual pattern of conquest. The humans would resist, briefly, suffer casualties, then surrender and begin serving the Empire efficiently. Instead, he was facing the most frustrating assignment of his military career. The colony looked normal from the outside. The buildings were intact, the power systems functioned, and the 40,000 human colonists went about their daily routines without obvious signs of rebellion. But nothing actually worked the way it was supposed to work. When Veltar ordered the agricultural sector to increase food production, the farmers followed his commands exactly. They planted more crops, used more fertilizer, and worked longer. Hours. The result was fields full of plants that grew too fast, produced bitter fruit, and died within weeks. The head agriculturalist, a human named Maria Santos, explained that increasing production required gradually adjusting soil conditions over several growing seasons. But the Zephyrian orders had demanded immediate results. You deliberately sabotaged the crops, Veltar accused Maria during one of their daily meetings. Commander, we followed your orders precisely, Maria replied with the patient tone she used when explaining things to children. You ordered us to double production immediately. We doubled the seed planting, doubled the fertilizer application, and doubled the irrigation cycles. The results were exactly what any agricultural expert would predict. Veltar stared at her through his ship's communication screen. Maria Santos was a small woman with gray hair and calm eyes who spoke to him like she was discussing the weather. She never showed fear, anger, or defiance. She just explained in simple terms why his orders produced disaster. The transportation network was even worse. The colony's traffic control center was managed by Danny Wilson, a cheerful man who followed every Zephyrian directive with enthusiastic precision. When Veltar ordered faster movement of military supplies, Danny reprogrammed the traffic systems to prioritize Zephyrian vehicles above all others. The result was chaos. Emergency vehicles couldn't reach accidents because Zephyrian supply trucks had absolute right-of-way. Civilian transport ground to a halt as military convoys took priority at every intersection. The colonists couldn't get to work, supplies couldn't reach their destinations, and the entire colony's economy began collapsing. "You're doing this deliberately," Veltar told Danny during an inspection. "Sir, I'm following your orders exactly," Danny replied with a bright smile. "You said Zephyrian military traffic was the highest priority. I made sure every traffic system in the colony knows that. Your trucks never have to wait at intersections anymore." "But nothing else can move," Veltar said through clenched teeth. "You didn't order me to make sure other things could move," Danny explained reasonably. "You just ordered me to prioritize your vehicles. That's what I did." Veltar was beginning to understand why the Empire's other conquest fleets were sending increasingly desperate reports. The humans weren't fighting back in any way the Zephyrian military could counter. They were following orders with a literal precision that made those orders meaningless. On the industrial side of the colony, factory supervisor Tony Garcia had turned manufacturing into an art form of malicious compliance. When ordered to produce more mining equipment for Zephyrian operations, Tony's factories worked at maximum capacity. They produced exactly what was requested, built to the exact specifications provided, using the exact materials specified in Zephyrian requisition forms. The problem was that Zephyrian requisition forms were designed for Zephyrian equipment operated by Zephyrian workers. The mining tools that Tony's factories produced were perfectly functional for beings with 4 arms, gray skin that could withstand radiation, and the ability to see in wavelengths humans couldn't detect. They were completely useless for the human workers that the Zephyrians actually needed to do the mining. "These tools don't work," complained Sub-Commander Ixnell after the 3rd shipment of useless equipment. "They work perfectly," Tony replied, demonstrating a mining laser designed for someone with 4 hands and no need for safety equipment. "See, it cuts through rock exactly as specified." The specifications just didn't account for the fact that humans only have 2 arms and need protective gear. Tony handed over the technical documentation that showed every piece of equipment met Zephyrian military standards precisely. The fact that those standards assumed the workers would be Zephyrians was not something any human had been told to consider. Back on New Dallas Station, Jake Morrison and his crew had spent 6 months perfecting the art of helpful incompetence. Dr. Kelly Brooks had been studying their captors with the dedication of a scientist and the patience of someone who knew she was playing a long game. "They're hierarchical," Kelly explained to Jake during one of their brief private conversations in the medical bay. "Everything in their society flows from the top down. They give orders and expect immediate, efficient compliance because that's how their own species works." "But we're not their species," Jake said. "Exactly," Kelly smiled. "We're cooperative, but we're also creative problem solvers who ask questions and consider consequences. Those traits make us excellent engineers and terrible slaves." Ben Carter had been teaching the station's maintenance systems to develop selective memory problems. The life support systems worked perfectly for the human crew, but developed mysterious glitches whenever Zephyrian personnel were in certain sections. The artificial gravity fluctuated in ways that affected Zephyrian balance, but not human movement. The lighting systems produced spectrums that human eyes found comfortable, but that gave Zephyrians headaches. "The systems are malfunctioning," Admiral Kethver complained during his weekly inspection. "Yes, sir," Ben agreed readily. "Human technology is pretty primitive compared to yours. Our systems weren't designed to handle the energy signatures from Zephyrian equipment. The interference patterns are causing cascading failures throughout the station. Ben showed Cuthbert detailed technical readouts that proved his point. The station's systems were indeed failing, but only in ways that made the Zephyrian occupation more difficult, while leaving human operations largely unaffected. Lisa Grant had found her own specialty in the art of bureaucratic resistance. As deputy commander, she was responsible for coordinating work assignments and resource allocation. Every Zephyrian request went through proper channels, was documented correctly, and received appropriate consideration according to established procedures. The problem was that human bureaucratic procedures had been designed by humans for humans working on human projects with human timelines. When applied to Zephyrian military demands, the result was an administrative nightmare that could turn a simple request for equipment maintenance into a 6-week process involving multiple departments, environmental impact assessments, and safety. Reviews. Why does it take so long to repair a communication array? Sub-Commander Velenex demanded. Well, sir, Lisa explained with professional courtesy. First, we need to file a work order with the engineering department. Then we need to check if the repair materials are available in inventory. If not, we have to submit a procurement request that goes through the supply chain management system. Since this involves Zephyrian equipment, we also need a compatibility assessment from our technical review board. Lisa handed over a stack of forms that detailed each step of the process. Every form was necessary according to station regulations. Every step was required for safety and efficiency. The fact that following all the proper procedures would take longer than the Zephyrians had patience for was simply an unfortunate consequence of working with human administrative systems. Commander Veltar looked out over New Austin Colony and realized that the Zephyrian Empire had made a fundamental miscalculation. They had assumed that conquering humans would be like conquering any other species. Instead, they had discovered that humans were not just another species. They were a species that could turn cooperation into resistance and compliance into rebellion, without ever breaking a single rule or disobeying a single order. Veltar activated his communication system to send another report to Supreme Commander Ixtal. Like every report he had sent for the past 6 months, it would explain that the humans were following orders, but somehow nothing was working the way it should. The Empire was learning that conquering a planet was easy, but governing humans was turning out to be impossible. Admiral Patricia Wells stood on the bridge of the flagship Constitution and watched her fleet prepare for the most unusual military operation in human history. 12 small stealth ships hung in space around her, each one equipped not with weapons, but with the most powerful communication arrays that human technology could build. Captain Robert Turner of the stealth ship Nighthawk was running final checks on his broadcasting equipment, while his communications officer, Lieutenant Nancy Foster, reviewed the messages they would soon transmit across the galaxy. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of attacking Zephyrian military targets, they would attack something much more valuable. They would attack the Empire's reputation for invincibility by showing every conquered species in the galaxy that resistance was possible. All ships report ready for Operation Whisper, Captain Helen Price announced from her position at the tactical station. Helen had commanded stealth operations for 15 years, and she understood that sometimes the most powerful weapon was information placed in the right hands at the right time. Begin the operation, Admiral Wells ordered. The 12 ships scattered across Zephyrian space like seeds carried by the wind. Each ship carried the same cargo of hope and rebellion. Recorded testimonies from every human colony under occupation, detailed instructions for passive resistance, and proof that the mighty Zephyrian Empire could be brought to its knees by ordinary people who simply refused to cooperate efficiently. Captain Turner guided the Nighthawk toward the Altarian system, where the Empire's most important quantum foundries processed exotic materials for their war machine. The Altarians had been under Zephyrian control for 20 years, and their advanced manufacturing capabilities kept the Empire's fleets supplied with the technology that maintained their dominance. Beginning broadcast, Lieutenant Foster announced. Message that spread across Altarian communication networks was simple and devastating. It was Jake Morrison speaking from his prison on New Dallas Station, explaining how 47 humans had turned a mining platform into an administrative nightmare that required more resources to manage than it produced. We didn't fight them, Jake's voice said clearly. We just made sure that everything they wanted us to do took 3 times longer than it should, cost twice as much as they expected, and produced results that were technically correct but practically useless. The broadcast included video recordings from New Austin Colony showing Maria Santos explaining how to sabotage agricultural production by following farming orders too literally. Danny Wilson demonstrated traffic management techniques that prioritized military vehicles so effectively that entire cities ground to a halt. Tony Garcia showed how to manufacture equipment that met all technical specifications while being completely unsuitable for actual use. But the most powerful part of the broadcast was Dr. Kelly Brooks speaking directly to alien viewers in her calm, professional voice. The Zephyrians assume that all species think like they do, Kelly explained. They believe that conquered people will work efficiently for their conquerors, because efficiency serves everyone's interests. They don't understand that efficiency requires willing cooperation, and cooperation can be withdrawn without violence or direct disobedience. On the Altarian homeworld, Quantum Foundry Supervisor Kemthal heard the human broadcasts and felt something he had not experienced in 20 years. Hope. The Altarians had submitted to Zephyrian rule because resistance seemed impossible. Their weapons were primitive compared to Zephyrian technology, and their military had been destroyed in the first week of occupation, but the humans were showing them a different kind of resistance. Kemthal looked around his foundry, where Altarian workers operated machinery that produced the exotic materials that powered Zephyrian starships. The workers were skilled, efficient, and completely demoralized. They did their jobs because the alternative was death, but they had never considered that they could do their jobs badly without being obviously defiant. Supervisor Kemthal, his assistant Veldara, said quietly, "Did you hear the human transmission?" "I heard it," Kemthal replied. "The question is what we do about it." Meanwhile, on 17 other worlds throughout the Empire, similar conversations were taking place. The Centauri merchants who managed interstellar trade routes were learning about human techniques for creative contract interpretation. The Rigelian farmers who fed 3 star systems were discovering how agricultural specifications could be followed in ways that produced inedible crops. The vegan miners who extracted the raw materials for Zephyrian technology were being taught how safety regulations could slow production to a crawl. Back on New Dallas Station, Jake Morrison was having his daily argument with Admiral Kethver about work productivity. The conversation had become a ritual that both participants understood perfectly, but neither could break. "The ore processing efficiency has dropped by 40% this month," Kethver stated with barely controlled anger. "Yes, sir," Jake agreed readily. "We explained that in our weekly reports. The processing equipment was designed for specific ore compositions found in this system. The ores you're bringing from other systems have different mineral content that require slower processing speeds to avoid damaging the machinery." Jake handed over technical documentation that proved his point. The reports were accurate, detailed, and completely honest. They also made clear that the Zephyrians could either accept reduced efficiency or spend months redesigning their entire mining operation. "You could process these ores faster if you wanted to," Kethver accused. "Certainly," Jake said. "We could run the processors at maximum speed, regardless of ore composition. Of course, that would destroy the equipment within a few weeks, and then..." We couldn't process any ore at all. But if that's what you want us to do, we'll follow your orders. Kethver stared at Jake with the frustrated expression of someone who was beginning to understand that he was trapped in a logical nightmare. Every conversation with humans ended the same way. They were willing to do exactly what they were told, but they insisted on explaining why those orders would produce disaster. And their explanations were always technically correct. Dr. Kelly Brooks had spent her time as a prisoner conducting the most thorough psychological study of Zephyrian behavior in human history. She shared her findings with Jake and the other senior crew members during their brief private moments. They're psychologically incapable of adapting to our resistance, Kelly explained. Their entire society is based on hierarchical command structures, where orders flow down and compliance flows up. They can't comprehend a system where compliance exists but effectiveness doesn't. So they're stuck, Ben Carter said. Worse than stuck, Kelly replied. They're trapped by their own assumptions about how civilized species should behave. They can't abandon their occupation because that would admit failure. But they can't make the occupation work because we're not following their psychological rules. Ben had been working on his own project during the months of imprisonment. He had been teaching the station's computer systems to develop what he called selective competence. The computers worked perfectly for human operations, but developed increasingly creative malfunctions whenever Zephyrians tried to use them. The environmental controls are failing again, Sub-Commander Ixnall complained. Yes, sir, Ben replied with professional concern. It's the interface problem we've discussed before. Zephyrian biosignatures confuse our computer systems because they were designed for human physiology. The computers keep trying to adjust life support for beings who need different atmospheric conditions. Ben showed Ixnall diagnostic reports that documented every system failure in detail. The reports made clear that human technology was simply incompatible with Zephyrian biology in subtle ways that caused cascading problems throughout the station's infrastructure. Lisa Grant had developed her own specialty in turning resource allocation into an exercise in frustration. Every Zephyrian request for supplies, equipment, or personnel went through proper administrative channels and received appropriate consideration according to established procedures. We need 50 maintenance workers for the mining operation, Commander Veltar demanded. I understand the urgency, Lisa replied with professional sympathy. Unfortunately, reassigning 50 workers requires approval from the Safety Committee, the Labor Allocation Board, and the Environmental Impact Assessment Team. The Safety Committee meets every 2 weeks, the Labor Board meets monthly, and the Environmental Team needs at least 3 weeks to complete their assessment. Lisa handed over the forms that Veltar would need to fill out to request the workers through proper channels. The forms were necessary according to station regulations. The procedures were required for safe and efficient operations. The fact that following all the proper steps would take longer than the Zephyrians had patience for was simply how human administrative systems worked. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the human broadcasts were having their intended effect. On Altair, Quantum Foundry production began experiencing mysterious delays as workers started following safety protocols with unprecedented precision. On Centauri Prime, shipping schedules became hopelessly confused as dock workers developed sudden concerns about proper cargo documentation. Supreme Commander Ixtal arrived at his Earth with the largest fleet in Zephyrian history, expecting to find a heavily defended world preparing for siege warfare. Instead, his sensors detected a modest collection of human ships arranged in what appeared to be a diplomatic formation rather than a battle line. The flagship Constitution hung in space surrounded by 12 smaller vessels, their weapons powered down and their communication arrays broadcasting a simple message welcoming the Zephyrian fleet to Earth space. Admiral Patricia Wells stood on the bridge of the Constitution, watching the alien armada approach. 47 massive warships capable of reducing Earth to Ashes were moving toward her small fleet with obvious hostile intent. Yet Patricia felt calmer than she had in months, because she knew something that Supreme Commander Ixtal was about. To learn. Incoming transmission from the Zephyrian flagship, Captain Helen Price announced. Put it on screen, Patricia ordered. Supreme Commander Ixtal appeared on the main display, his forearms spread in what Patricia assumed was a gesture of authority. Behind him, the bridge of his flagship buzzed with activity as Zephyrian officers, prepared for what they expected to be humanity's final surrender. Admiral Wells of Earth, Ixtal began in his grinding metallic voice. I am Supreme Commander Ixtal of the Zephyrian Empire. You will surrender immediately and order all human colonies to cease their rebellious activities. Failure to comply will result in the destruction of your homeworld. Patricia looked at the alien commander with the same professional courtesy she would show any visiting dignitary. Supreme Commander, I'm Admiral Patricia Wells of the Terran Defense Force. We're prepared to discuss terms for a peaceful resolution to this conflict. There are no terms, Ixtal replied. You will surrender unconditionally or face annihilation. I understand your position, Patricia said calmly. But before we proceed, I'd like you to meet some people who have experience with Zephyrian occupation. Policies. The communication link expanded to include additional participants. Jake Morrison appeared on screen from the Constitution's guest quarters, followed by Ben Carter, Dr. Kelly Brooks, and Lisa Grant. The crew of New Dallas Station looked remarkably healthy and relaxed for people who had been prisoners of war for 8 months. Supreme Commander, Jake said with a slight smile, it's good to see you again. I hope Admiral Kethver is managing the station efficiently. Ixtal stared at the human prisoners who should have been broken by months of captivity, but instead looked like they were attending a business meeting. How did you escape your confinement? We didn't escape, Jake replied. We were transferred. Here 3 days ago, when your fleet was detected approaching Earth, Admiral Kethver was quite eager to get rid of us. Actually, something about New Dallas Station being more trouble to operate than it was worth. Dr. Kelly Brooks leaned forward with the expression of someone sharing interesting research data. Supreme Commander, during our time in Zephyrian custody, we conducted an extensive study of Imperial administrative efficiency. Would you like to hear our findings? Your findings are irrelevant, Ixtal said, but Patricia noticed uncertainty in his voice. Actually, they're quite relevant to this situation, Kelly continued. We discovered that the Zephyrian Empire requires a compliance rate of approximately 85% from conquered populations to maintain profitable operations. When compliance drops below that threshold, the cost of occupation exceeds the economic benefits. Kelly activated a holographic display showing data collected from across the empire. Charts and graphs illustrated the systematic decline in productivity that had spread through Zephyrian space over the past 8 months. As you can see, Kelly explained with academic precision, compliance rates have fallen below the sustainability threshold on every world. Where human resistance techniques have been implemented, the Empire is now spending more resources on occupation forces than it receives from conquered territories. Commander Jack Sullivan, Patricia's tactical officer, highlighted specific data points on the display. The Altarian quantum foundries are operating at 30% efficiency. Centauri trade routes have become so unreliable that shipping costs have tripled. Rigelian mining operations are producing barely enough materials to cover their own operational expenses. This is temporary disruption, Ixtal insisted. Order will be restored. With respect, Supreme Commander, Jake Morrison interjected, we've been studying your Empire's administrative methods for 8 months. Order can't be restored because the problem isn't rebellion. The problem is that you're trying to govern species who have learned that cooperation is voluntary. Ben Carter activated another display showing technical reports from New Dallas Station. Supreme Commander, do you remember when you ordered us to increase ore processing efficiency by 50%? We followed your orders exactly. We increased processing speed by 50%, which destroyed the equipment within 2 weeks and reduced total output to 0. You deliberately sabotaged the machinery, Ixtal accused. No, sir, Ben replied patiently. We followed your orders precisely. You ordered increased efficiency without providing specifications for maintaining equipment longevity. We could have explained that your orders would destroy the machinery, but you told us that explaining consequences was not our responsibility. Lisa Grant added her own examples from the administrative side. Supreme Commander, your occupation forces submitted over 3,000 work orders during our imprisonment. We processed every single order according to proper procedures. The average processing time was 6 weeks per order, because Zephyrian requests didn't include the documentation required by human administrative systems. You could have processed those orders faster, Ixtal said. Certainly, Lisa agreed. We could have ignored safety regulations, environmental impact assessments, and quality control procedures. Of course, that would have violated the same imperial efficiency standards that you ordered us to maintain. We chose to follow your orders about maintaining standards rather than your orders about processing speed. Supreme Commander Ixtal was beginning to understand the trap that his empire had fallen into. The humans had never disobeyed orders, never openly rebelled, and never violated any imperial regulations. They had simply followed those orders and regulations with a literal precision that made them meaningless. What do you want? Ixtal asked. Finally, President Chris Matthews joined the communication link from his office in the White House. Supreme Commander, we want to end this conflict peacefully and establish a framework for coexistence that benefits everyone involved. You are in no position to make demands, Ixtal said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. We're not making demands, President Matthews replied. We're offering solutions. The Zephyrian Empire is facing a choice. You can continue trying to govern unwilling populations and watch your civilization collapse under the administrative burden, or you can transition to a system based on voluntary cooperation and mutual benefit. General Sam Rodriguez displayed a comprehensive analysis of the Empire's current situation. Rebellion was spreading to species that had been loyal to the Empire for generations. Administrative costs were rising exponentially as more populations adopted human resistance techniques. Military forces were stretched thin, trying to maintain order on dozens of worlds where order had become impossible to maintain. The Empire you built was based on the assumption that conquered species would serve efficiently out of fear, General Rodriguez explained. That assumption worked until your subjects learned that efficiency requires willing cooperation. Now you're discovering that fear alone isn't sufficient to maintain complex administrative systems. Dr. Kelly Brooks returned to the conversation with her final analysis. Supreme Commander, the Zephyrian Empire faces what humans call a cascade failure. Each world that adopts passive resistance requires more resources to govern, which reduces the resources available for governing other worlds, which makes those worlds more likely to adopt resistance themselves. The process is self-reinforcing and irreversible under current imperial policies. What are you proposing? Ixtal asked. The Terran Accords, President Matthews replied. A framework for voluntary association between species that provides mutual benefits without coercive governance. Member species contribute to collective security and economic development in exchange for protection of their sovereignty and cultural independence. Admiral Patricia Wells brought up the specific terms of the proposed agreement. The Zephyrian Empire would transition from an imperial system to a federal system where membership was voluntary and governance required consent. Human colonies would be granted immediate independence, but would offer technical assistance to other species. seeking to establish autonomous governments. The Empire's military would be restructured as a defensive alliance rather than an occupation force. And if we refuse, Ixtal asked. Jake Morrison answered that question with the same calm certainty he had shown throughout their captivity. Then you continue trying to govern populations that have learned how to be ungovernable. Supreme Commander, you missed the fundamental point of human resistance. We didn't fight you because we didn't need to fight you. We just needed to exist in your empire until your empire couldn't afford us anymore.